White Mongols, the historical presence and influence of Europoid groups in Mongolia. Prehistoric whites in Mongolia. An ancient pre-Indo-European group of whites referred to as Ancient North Eurasians, represented by the Malta-Beret culture, played a significant role in the genetic history of the eastern Eurasian steppe, including areas in present-day Mongolia, and their ancestry is found in populations across the region. They were hunter-gatherers, similar to the Cro-Magnons of Western Europe. Ancient North Eurasians migrated south to East Asia or southern Siberia, where they had encountered and mixed with ancient East Asians. Genetic evidence from Lake Baikal in Mongolia supports this area as the location where the admixture took place. White Tocharian introduction of pastoralism and metallurgy to Mongolia. The Afanasyevo were early Indo-Europeans who had migrated from the Yamnaya culture of the Pontic-Caspian steppe, present-day Ukraine and southern Russia. Horse-riding nomadism has been documented by archaeological evidence in Mongolia during the Copper and Bronze Age Afanasyevo culture, Proto-Tocharians 3500 to 2500 BCE. The Afanasyevans are now considered as the earliest herders of East Asia, who were instrumental in the establishment of the long tradition of pastoralism in Mongolia. Their rise also corresponds with the appearance of domesticated horses, sheep, goats, and cattle, which marks the earliest spread of these domesticated animals and pastoralism to Inner Asia. They also introduced the initial practice of copper and bronze metallurgy. Afanasyevo burials include metal artifacts in copper, bronze, awls, knives, gold, and silver, as well as the remains of disassembled carts. The Afanasyevans may have used cattle-drawn wagons, as did Yamnaya communities. The Afanasyevo culture was brought to the Altai region via migration from the western Eurasian steppe. From the Altai Mountains, steppe-derived Afanasyevo ancestry spread to the east into Mongolia and to the south into Xinjiang. In Dzungaria, Afanasyevo-related ancestry persisted at least into the late 1st millennium BCE. The white Tocharian Afanasyevo people had brought their pastoralist technologies and nomadic lifestyle to Mongolia, which the indigenous tribes would eventually adopt. They also introduced copper and bronze metallurgy to East Asia, as well as their more advanced weaving technology and clothing. Prior to the Afanasyevo migration, the white ANE and Mongoloid inhabitants of the area were Stone Age hunter-gatherers with no copper or bronze tools. The region was subsequently occupied by the Andronovo, Karasik, Tagar, and Tashtik cultures, respectively. All of these were Indo-Europeans. Tocharian Kemerchek culture. According to archaeologist Alexei Kovalev, the Chemerchek culture, 2750 to 1900 BCE, an Altaic culture with many similarities with cultures of Western Europe, and especially southern France, in burial and statuary styles, may have been associated with the Proto-Tocharians. The Kemerchek culture, 2750 to 1900 BCE, is a Bronze Age archaeological culture of western Mongolia and the borders of neighboring countries, such as the Dzungarian basin of Xinjiang and eastern Kazakhstan. It immediately follows the Afanasyevo culture and is contemporary with the early Tarim mummies to the south and the Okunev culture to the north. The Chemerchek burials are characterized by large rectangular stone fences built around collective tombs. The mortuary position of the deceased, supine position with flexed legs, is similar to that of the Afanasyevo culture, but the Chemerchek culture is considered as distinct. The name Chemerchek culture is derived from the Chemerchek Cemetery in Altai city of Chinese Xinjiang. Chemerchek sites have been identified from western Mongolia to areas as far west as the Ili Valley, Bortala Mongol Autonomous Prefecture. Characteristics: Chemerchek genetic profile. Anthropomorphic standing stones were erected next to the tombs on their eastern side. Their faces have a straight nose, thick brow ridges, and globular eyes. They appear to be naked as pectoral muscles seem to be depicted. They far predate and are very different from Turkic Balbal statues found in the same general area but dated to the 7th to 10th centuries CE. They are highly similar to Western European anthropomorphic stelae, suggesting the transfer of cultural characteristics through migration. In the tombs, artifacts have been recovered such as stone bowls, bone tools, ceramics, gray wares with sophisticated patterns of incised decoration, or metal jewelry. Bronze artifacts, too, are available. Bronze tools include knives, awls, spearheads, and arrowheads. Bronze was cast in open or composite stone molds and seems to have been a focus of economic production. Dental analysis has shown that the Kemerchek culture consumed ruminant dairy products. The people of the Kemerchek culture were apparently descendants of Afanasyevo populations intermixed with local populations called Ancient North Eurasians, archaic Europoids. Their genetic profile shows a mix of Afanasyevo Tocharians and so-called Ancient North Eurasians. In the Altai Mountains and to the southeast, Afanasyevans seem to have coexisted with the early period of the Kemerchek culture for some time, as some of their burials are contemporary and some of the artifacts of the burials coincide. The Kemerchek culture had various characteristics which were similar to West European cultures. Another Kemerchek burial site was discovered in Yagshin Kudu in Bulgansum, Kovdaimag, which contained the oldest kurgan stele discovered so far in Mongolia, dated to c. 2500 to 2000 BCE. European connections. Archaeologist Alexei Kovalev has remarked on the similarities between the material and tomb cultures of the Kemercheks and those of southern France. The Kemerchek statues have a lot in common with southern French statues of the late 4th millennium, such as La Dame de Saint-Cernan or the statue Menhir de Maison Aube. Kovalev further suggests that the Kemerchek culture may be associated with Proto-Tocharians, who must have migrated to the east around this period, and whose Western Indo-European language is closest to Proto-Germanic and Proto-Italian, corresponding to the broad geographical area encompassing southern France. Both of these areas were influenced by the Yamnaya culture of Eastern Europe. Yamnaya descendants spread similar art styles to Western Europe and Mongolia. Aryan invasion of Mongolia. The Yamnaya-related lineages and ancestry in the Afanasyevo Tocharians disappeared in the course of the Bronze Age in the Altai region and Mongolia, being replaced by the migrating populations from the Aryan Sintashta culture of Central Asia arriving from the west. The Sintashta Aryans had introduced chariots and new weapons technology to Mongolia and China. Alentoft et al. 2015 confirmed that the Afanasyevo culture was replaced by a second wave of Indo-European migrations from the Andronovo and Sintashta Aryan cultures during the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age. The Aryan population was found to be genetically related, but clearly distinct from the Tocharian population. The Aryans had originally migrated from the corded ware culture of northwestern Europe. Ordos culture, Scythian invasion of Mongolia. The Ordos culture was a material culture occupying a region centered on the Ordos Loop in Inner Mongolia, China, during the Bronze and early Iron Age from c. 800 BCE to 150 BCE. The Ordos culture is known for significant finds of Scythian art, and they represent one of the most far eastern extensions of Indo-European nomads, such as the Saka. Equestrian nomads from the northwest occupied the area previously settled by the Zhukai-Go culture and the Shimao culture from the 6th to the 2nd century BCE. Some authors date the arrival from the north and west of these nomads practicing mounted warfare to the 4th century BCE, corresponding roughly to the period of the conquests of Alexander the Great in Central Asia. They came in several waves from Central Asia and southern Siberia through the Gansu corridor before settling in the Ordos region. This also roughly corresponds to the period when mounted warfare was introduced in the Chinese state of Zhao during the Warring States period. The Ordos are mainly known from their skeletal remains and artifacts. The Ordos culture of about 500 BCE to 100 CE is known for its Ordos bronzes, blade weapons, finials for tent poles, horse gear, and small plaques and fittings for clothes and horse harness, using animal-style decoration, which has relationships with the Scythian art of regions much further west. Because the people represented in archaeological finds tend to display Europoid features, also earlier noted by Otto J. Mencken-Helfen, Yaroslav Lebedinsky suggests the Ordos culture had a Scythian affinity. The weapons found in tombs throughout the steppes of the Ordos are very close to those of the Scythians. Ancient artifacts from the Ordos culture depict people with distinctly white European physical traits, and none of them have Mongoloid traits. The type of nomadic culture, which is generally associated with Turks and Mongols, was originally created by the Scythians. Scythians invented the yurt, portable circular dwellings traditionally used by nomadic groups in Central Asia. The Scythian community inhabited western Mongolia in the 5th to 6th centuries. In 2006, the mummy of a Scythian warrior, which is believed to be about 2,500 years old, was a 30 to 40-year-old man with blonde hair, was found in the Altai Mountains, Mongolia. In historical times, Scythian nomads were concentrated on the steppe lands of Central Asia. By the 8th century BCE, the inhabitants of the western part of Mongolia evidently were nomadic Indo-European migrants, Scythians and Uashi, Tocharians. In the central and eastern parts of Mongolia were many other tribes that were primarily Northeast Asian in their ethnologic characteristics. With the introduction of iron weapons from the Scythians by the 3rd century BCE, the inhabitants of Mongolia had begun to form clan alliances and lived a hunter and herder lifestyle. Iron smelting technology was introduced into ancient Mongolia during this time from the west through the steppe taiga area. Iron was brought to the region by the Scythians. The Scythians were tall and powerfully built, even by modern standards. Skeletons of Scythian elites differ from those of modern people by their longer arms and legs and stronger bone formation. Commoners were shorter, averaging 10 to 15 centimeters, 4 to 6 in, shorter than the elite. Numerous eastern Scythian remains have been found in an excellent state of preservation in the Altai Mountains, with soft tissues such as skin and hair preserved. From the Pazyryk Valley, Scythian remains show a variety of hair colors, ranging from black to bright chestnut. Mummified Scythian warriors from the Yukok Plateau in Mongolia had blonde hair. The Scythians looked the same as their white cousins in Europe. Depictions of Scythian men in Persian sculptures and on Scythian gold objects show them as stocky and powerfully built, with strong facial features and long and thick wavy hair. Upper-class Scythians were particularly tall, with the men usually being over 1.80 meters tall, sometimes reaching 1.90 meters, and on some rarer occasions being even more than 2 meters tall. The difference in height between these upper-class Scythians and the Scythian commoners was of around 10 to 15 centimeters, with the height difference being a symbol of status among the upper-class men. Analysis of skeletons shows that Scythians had longer arm and leg bones and stronger bone formation than present-day people living in their former territories. In histories, the 5th century BC Greek historian Herodotus describes the Budini of Scythia as red-haired and gray-eyed. In the 5th century BC, Greek physician Hippocrates argued that the Scythians were light-skinned. In the 3rd century BC, the Greek poet Callimachus described the Arismopus Arimaspi of Scythia as fair-haired. The 2nd century BC Han Chinese envoy Zhang Qian described the Sai, Saka, an eastern people closely related to the Scythians, as having yellow, probably meaning hazel or green, and blue eyes. In the late 2nd century AD, the Christian theologian Clement of Alexandria says that the Scythians and the Celts have long auburn hair. The 2nd century Greek philosopher Polemon includes the Scythians among the northern peoples characterized by red hair and blue-gray eyes. In the late 2nd or early 3rd century AD, the Greek physician Galen writes that Scythians, Sarmatians, Illyrians, Germanic peoples, and other northern peoples have reddish hair. The 4th century bishop Gregory of Nyssa wrote that the Scythians were fair-skinned and blonde-haired. The 5th century physician Adamantius, who often followed Polemon, describes the Scythians as fair-haired. The homeland of the original Indo-European founders of the Xiongnu Confederation was the Ordos Plateau. Scythian founders of the Xiongnu Confederation. The Xiongnu were a confederation of nomadic tribes founded by Modu Chanyu. They dominated the eastern Eurasian steppe from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE, known for their mounted warfare and their conflicts with the Han dynasty of China, which led to the construction of the Great Wall. The original Xiongnu elite had evolved from the Ordos people. The Ordos Scythians were the founders of Xiongnu. A study found evidence of a Western Eurasian male in a 2,000-year-old elite Xiongnu cemetery in northeast Mongolia, indicating the presence of individuals with genetic ancestry linked to Europe or Central Asia within the Xiongnu population. This discovery was based on analysis of the individual's DNA, specifically their Y chromosome, which showed a haplogroup commonly associated with Indo-European populations in Europe and Central Asia. The remains were discovered in an elite Xiongnu cemetery in northeast Mongolia. Analysis revealed a Y chromosome haplogroup, R1A1, typically associated with Indo-European populations. Other specimens are a female with mtDNA haplogroup D4 and a male with Y-SNP haplogroup C3 and mtDNA haplogroup D4. Those haplogroups are common in Northeast Asia. There was no close kinship among them. The genetic evidence of U2E1 and R1A1 may help to clarify the migration patterns of Indo-Europeans and ancient East-West contacts of the Xiongnu Empire. Artifacts in the tombs suggested that the Xiongnu had a system of social stratification. Harold Walter Bailey proposed an Indo-European origin of the Xiongnu, recognizing all of the earliest Xiongnu names of the 2nd century BCE as being of the Indo-European type. Central Asian scholar Christopher Was Beckwith notes that the Xiongnu name could be a cognate of Scythian, Saka, and Sogdia. According to Beckwith, the Xiongnu could have contained a leading Indo-European component when they started out. The Scythian ruling caste had introduced the Aryan nomadic model to the Turks and Mongols. In the 1994 UNESCO published History of Civilizations of Central Asia, its editor János Harmata claims that the royal tribes and kings of the Xiongnu bore Indo-European names, that all Xiongnu words noted by the Chinese can be explained from a Scythian language, and that it is therefore clear that the majority of Xiongnu tribes spoke an Indo-European language which was imposed on them by their Scythian ruling caste. In the 1920s, Pyotr Kozlov oversaw the excavation of royal tombs at the Noin Ula burial site in northern Mongolia, dated to around the 1st century CE. Other Xiongnu sites have been unearthed in Inner Mongolia, such as the Ordos culture. Sinologist Otto Machen-Helfen has said that depictions of the Xiongnu of Transbaikalia and the Ordos commonly show individuals with West Eurasian features. Iaroslav Lebedinsky said that West Eurasian depictions in the Ordos region should be attributed to a Scythian affinity. According to Rogers and Kastel, 2022, roughly 47% of Xiongnu period remains belong to paternal haplogroups associated with modern West Eurasians, while the rest, 53%, belong to East Asian haplogroups. They observed that this contrasts strongly with the preceding slab grave period, which was dominated by East Asian patrilineages. They suggest that this may reflect an aggressive expansion of people with West Eurasian paternal haplogroups. Ancient Han Chinese art had often portrayed the Hu barbarians that they were in conflict with as having typical Scythian Europoid features, such as tall, prominent noses, deep-set eyes, and pointed Saka caps. The Chinese built the Great Wall to try and defend themselves from these Saka giants, as well as the various Mongoloid tribes who had joined the Xiongnu Confederacy. The predominant part of the Xiongnu population were of Turkic and Mongolic descent, but they adopted the Indo-European Scythian language of their rulers. Important cultural, technological, and political elements were transmitted by Eastern Iranic-speaking steppe nomads. These white Indo-European groups were assimilated over time by the predominant Turkic and Mongolic parts of the Xiongnu population. Although the original Scythian founders of the Xiongnu had mixed with Turks and Mongols, thereby becoming the Huns, the Scythian language had continued to be the dominant language in the Xiongnu Confederacy. Only 3 words are recorded in ancient sources as being Hunnic, all of which appear to be from an Indo-European language. Contemporary observers of the European Huns, such as Priscus and the 6th century historian Jordanes, preserved 3 words of the language of the Huns. In the villages we were supplied with food, millet instead of corn, and matos as the natives call it. The attendants who followed us received millet and a drink of barley, which the barbarians call kamos. When the Huns had mourned him Attila with such lamentations, a strava, as they call it, was celebrated over his tomb with great reveling. The words matos, a beverage akin to mead, kamos, a barley drink, and strava, a funeral feast, are of Indo-European origin. Machen-Helfen classified some names as having roots in Iranic languages. Christopher Atwood has argued, as one explanation for his proposed etymology of the name Hun, that their state or confederation must be seen as the result of Sogdian Bactrian, Iranic-speaking leadership and organization. The Xiongnu were ultimately defeated by the Han dynasty in China and then fragmented, with some of their descendants later migrating west, where they would be known as the Huns. The founders of Xiongnu were likely the Scythians of the Ordos culture, but over time they mixed with Turks, Mongols, and Han, fake princesses which the Chinese had deceptively sent them, instead of their real ones, becoming the mixed-race Huns. By the time the Huns, Xiongnu descendants, had invaded Europe, they had become a predominantly Mongoloid people. This can be clearly demonstrated from the Roman historian Jordanes, who cites a description of Attila the Hun given by Priscus. Short of stature, with a broad chest and a large head, his eyes were small, his beard thin and sprinkled with gray, and he had a flat nose and swarthy skin, showing evidence of his origin. Dingling, Scytho-Siberian descendants. The Dingling were a nomadic people that originally lived south of Lake Baikal and were vassals of the Xiongnu Empire. The Dingling were an ancient people who appear in Chinese historiography in the context of the 1st century BCE. Modern archaeologists have identified the Dingling as belonging to the eastern Scythian horizon, namely the Tagar culture. The ethnonym Dingling is regarded by modern scholars in the Western world as being interchangeable with the ethnonym Tila, who are believed to be the descendants of the Dingling. Chinese historiographers believed that Tila was a mistaken transcription, related them to the ancient Red D, and recorded various names like Dili, Gauch, or Chile. Several modern scholars, including Peter B. Golden, now believe that all of these ethnonyms described by the Chinese all derive from Altaic exonyms describing wheeled vehicles, with Dingling perhaps being an earlier rendering of a Tuoba word, tegreg, meaning wagon. Peter Golden also wrote that Gauch or high carts may be a translation of Dingling et al. Edwin Pullyblank writes that high cart is just one of several variations of exonyms that ultimately reflect the original Turkic meaning of Dingling, which is possibly derived from tegreg, meaning circle, hoop. The widely mentioned 3 Dingling groups, one group south of Majing, literally horse-shanked people, north of Kangju and west of Wusun, another south of the North Sea, identified as Lake Baikal, and another north of Xiongnu and neighboring the Kushi, Hunyun, Gekun, and Shinli, all of whom had once been conquered by the Xiongnu. There is evidence that the Dingling looked like European people, based on their identification with the Tagar culture of the Altai region in Siberia. In the 20th century, several historians proposed that the Tagar people were characterized by a high frequency of light hair and light eyes, and that the associated Dingling were blonde-haired. Genetic testing of fossils from the Tagar culture has confirmed the theory that they were often blue-eyed and light-haired. 21st century scholars continue to describe the Dingling in a similar manner. Adrian Mayer repeated N. Ishjant's description, 1994, of the Dingling as red-haired, blue-eyed giants, while M.V. Dorina called the Dingling European-looking. The new book also relates that the Yenisei Kyrgyz, Turkicized Scythians, intermixed with the Dingling. Murphy, 2003, proposes that the Dingling's country had been in the Minusinsk Basin on the Yenisei River, thus close to the location of the Dingling group who neighbored the Kangju, Wusun, and Majing people. Dingling gradually moved southward to Mongolia and northern China. They were a huge independent horde for centuries, but were later defeated and temporarily became subject of the Xiongnu Empire. One group, known as the West Dingling, remained in an area that would become Kazakhstan, while others, expelled from Mongolia by the Ruran, settled in the Tarim Basin during the 5th century and took control of Turpan. Eastern Scythian carts used by the Pazyryk culture had tall wheels. These same carts were later used by the Dingling and other Scythian nomads, which provides evidence of cultural continuity between the Scythians and the Dingling. The Dingling had a warlike society formed by traders, hunters, fishers, and gatherers, living a semi-nomadic life in the southern Siberian mountain taiga region from Lake Baikal to northern Mongolia. Some ancient sources claim that Di or Jie was adopted as the group name because the Jie family had been the ruling house for centuries. Other sources claim that they might have been correlated with the Guifang, a northern tribe that appears in the oracle bone inscriptions from Yinshu. To the north of the Xiongnu Empire and Dingling territories, At the headwaters of the Yenisei around Tanu Uriankai lived the Gekun, also known as the Yenisei Kyrgyz in later records. Further to the west near the Irtysh River lived the Huji. Other tribes living among the Xiongnu, such as the Hunyu, Kush, and Shinli, were only mentioned once in Chinese records, and their exact location is unknown. During the 2nd century BCE, the Dingling became subjects of Modu Chanyu, along with 26 other tribes, including the Yushi and Wusun. Dingling and Xiongnu. The Dingling were first subjugated by the Xiongnu, but the latter gradually weakened. In 71 BCE, after numerous conflicts between the Chinese and the Xiongnu, the Dingling, led by Zhai Jin, with help from neighboring tribes, took the opportunity to revolt. From 63 to 60 BCE, during a split within the Xiongnu ruling clan of Luanti, the Dingling attacked the Xiongnu, together with the Wusun from the west, supported by the Chinese from the south and the Wuhuan from the southeast. In 51 BCE, the Dingling, together with the Huji and Gekun, were defeated by the Xiongnu under Zhiji Chanyu on his way to Kangju. Over the next century, there may have been more uprisings, but the only recorded one was in the year 85, when together with the Xianbei they made their final attack on the Xiongnu, and Dingling regained its power under Jia Ying. After that, under Dingling pressure, the remaining northern Xiongnu and the Tuoba formed the confederacy by Xianbei chief Tanchihuai. After his death in 181, the Xianbei moved south, and the Dingling took their place on the steppe. Some groups of Dingling, called the West Dingling by the ancient Chinese, started to migrate into Western Asia, but settled in Kangju, modern-day Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. There is no specific source to tell where exactly they settled, but some claim Lake Zaisen. A branch of the Dingling migrated west and resided in Kangju, becoming known as the Western Dingling before moving into China. During the 16 Kingdoms period, the Zhai clan of the Western Dingling were one of the earliest groups to rebel against the former Qin after their defeat at the Battle of Fei River, and in 388 they founded the short-lived Jie Wei dynasty. The Dingling that remained behind on the northern steppes were later known as the Chile Gauchortile people. The Zhai clan were Dingling people who once resided in Kangju, Sogdiana, in the western regions for generations before migrating into China. Their first recorded leader was Zhai Shu, who was living with his followers around Zhongshan and Changshan commanderies during the fall of western Jin. The Zhai later became subjects of the Sogdian Ji people's Yuvan. Later Zhao dynasty, with their chieftain, Zhai Bin, receiving the title of Prince of Gaoting. They later submitted to the former Yan and adopted the Xianbei's Mongolic language. They and other white groups among the Xianbei would later be referred to as yellow-headed Xianbei. In 371, after the Yan was conquered by the former Qin, Zhai Bin and his people were forcibly relocated to Shinan and Mianchi in the east, a decision that sparked discontent among the Dingling. Jie Sogdian founders of later Zhao, other white groups had also been incorporated into the multi-ethnic Xiongnu Empire as they expanded their territory. One of these groups was a people known as Ji. The Ji people were Kangju Sogdians. They were identified by their tall noses and full beards. Although the Kangju's territory was small, the fertility of the land and their sophisticated civilization enabled the Kangju to maintain a large population, becoming a major military power. The Kangju were in frequent struggles with another Indo-European tribe called the Wusun, during which they, in the mid-1st century BCE, allied themselves with the northern Xiongnu. The Kangju ruler gave his daughter in marriage to the northern Xiongnu ruler Jiji, while the Kangju king married the daughter of the Xiongnu ruler. At this time, some of the northern Xiongnu rulers were still white, but their numbers were quickly decreasing, partially due to accepting fake princesses from the Han Chinese for marriage. The Xiongnu and Kangju were initially successful, besieging the Wusun in 42 BCE. The Han, however, intervened, defeating and killing the northern Xiongnu ruler at Talas in 36 BCE, Battle of Jiji, thereby contributing to the decrease in the original Scythian rulers of Xiongnu. During the Xiongnu Civil War, the Kangju Xiongnu Jie had sided with the southern Xiongnu and joined them. The Jie were one of the 5 tribal groups which pillaged China. They were said to have possessed a higher nose bridge than the other nomadic groups. The Jie people dwelled in 3 counties in today's Shanxi, including Jieshe. However, it could be that the place was a newly added name to denote the fact that the Jie lived there, not that the Jie derived the name from the said place. According to the conversation between Fotu Cheng and Shi Hu, the Jie ruler, though a second generation in comparison with founder Shi Lei, was still someone to be born outside of the China domain. This means that the Jie migrants entered China to settle down next to the Huns as relatively newcomers. The Jie and the Huns were not friends, as the Jie rounded up all Tugay clan of the Huns in an ethnic cleansing. According to sinologist Mark Edward Lewis, the Jie were of Indo-European origin, probably Sogdian. According to the Book of Wei, 6th century CE, the name Jie was derived from the Jishi area, modern Yushi County in Shanxi Province, where the Jie resided. The Jie may have given their name to this region. According to the Book of Jin, the ancestors of Shi Lei were a part of the multi-ethnic southern Xiongnu tribe known as Qiangku, although by the 4th century, Shi Lei and his people were classed separate from the Xiongnu as a miscellaneous Hu group. Edwin Pullyblank believes the Qiangku represent the Kangju state of Sogdia. Kangju was constituted by Sogdian people. Some have linked the names Shi and Jie to a Sogdian statelet known as Shiguo, literally stone country, at now Tashkent, also meaning stone city in common Turkic. The dynastic surname of the state, later Zhao, was Shi, stone, from a tribe Xiansui, Qianggyo. The tribe Xiansui was one of 19 tribes of the southern Xiongnu, but they were Kangju in origin and were a part of the tribal group with a common name, Tse, Chiat. The existence of certain ties of the Tse, Jie tribes with the Central Asian princedoms Kangar, Kangju, is traceable. The names Xianizui and Kantsui are synonyms. Presumably, these Jie, Kiat, Kangju had joined the Xiongnu after the Xiongnu Empire had expanded into their territory. The Jie tribe Qiangku were Kangju people who had been incorporated into the Xiongnu Tribal Confederation. Shi Lei, the founder of the later Zhao dynasty, was a descendant of the Xiongnu Qiangku tribe, Kangju Sogdians, although by his time he and his people had become a separate ethnic group known as the Jie. The Jie people had disassociated themselves from the Xiongnu Huns at an early date, becoming a miscellaneous Hu. This is why they preserved their white Europoid traits. It's because they didn't mix with the Turks, Mongols, and Han, who were part of the multi-ethnic Xiongnu Confederacy. In 302 or 303, Bing Province suffered a major famine, and the Jie tribes were seriously affected. Shi Lei's tribe spread out and became refugees. Shi and many other Jie and Hu people were captured by Jin officials and sold as slaves. Eventually, he was sold to a man named Shi Huan, but Shi Huan freed him after becoming impressed with his talents. Eventually, he became a leader of bandits. Shi Lei would go on to become the founding emperor of the Jie-led later Zhao dynasty of China. He was initially sold as a slave by Western Jin officials, but after attaining freedom, he helped start a rebellion and eventually became a powerful general for the Han Zhao dynasty, conquering most of northern China in Han Zhao's name, but holding the territory under his own control. Shi Lei is notably the only emperor in Chinese history to have risen from the status of slave. Additionally, Shi Lei was an important figure in the rise of Buddhism in 4th century China, as he allowed the Kuchan monk Fotudang to wield considerable influence in his court. As detailed in the writings of the Tocharian monk Fotu Cheng's writings, the Jie were Central Asian immigrants who were conquered by the Xiongnu Confederacy and then joined them. The relationship between Jie rulers Shi Lei and his son Shi Hu, Shi Jilong, was adoption, with Gaoseng Zhuan, biographies of distinguished monks, stating that his adopted son was from Jiban, i.e., Kabul of Afghanistan, which at this time was occupied by many Aryan groups such as the Kushans and Scythians. From monk Fotu Cheng's mouth, we could tell that the past of the Jie king, Shi Hu, or his ancestors, a merchant, previously attended a gathering in today's Afghanistan, on which occasion some priest claimed that the Jie merchant would one day rule the land of Jin China. The Jie appeared to possess the Hu Tian Heaven Temple, which was speculated to be of a Zoroastrian temple. Both Shi Lei and Shi Hu endorsed Buddhism by granting the Kuchan Tocharian monk Fotu Cheng a privileged position within their government. This shows that white Tocharians from the Tarim Basin had also gained high positions in the later Zhao government. Buddhism was at first restricted to government officials, but as the religion became increasingly popular among commoners as well, Shi Hu promoted religious freedom, stating that his people have the right to worship the Buddha, who was a foreigner like him. Under later Zhao, the white Tocharian monk Fotu Cheng's teachings spread, and many Buddhist temples were built in northern China. The Tocharian monk Fotu Cheng succeeded in converting the Jie Sogdian warlord Shi Lei and became his closest advisor as he founded the later Zhao dynasty in 319 CE. Fotu Cheng uttered the only phrase that reached us in the Jie language, cited in connection with Shi Lei's successful war against Liu Yao of former Zhao in 328 CE. Eventually, Fotu Cheng became a later Zhao government official under Shi Hu, who allowed him to found a great number of Buddhist temples. Among his disciples were Daoan, Jufaya, Jufatai, Fahe, and Fachang. These disciples had a great impact on Buddhism in China and continued to revere the memory of their teacher. In his History of China, John Key writes, Fotu Cheng's disciples would include some of Chinese Buddhism's most outstanding scholars. When the later Zhao kingdom fell apart in 349, 4 princes were enthroned and murdered in that year alone. Fotu Deng's disciples fanned out across the north from Shandong to Sichuan and gravitated south as far as Guangdong. One of them, the monk Daoan, became the greatest exponent, translator, and organizer in the early history of Chinese Buddhism, and of his disciples, several assisted Kumarajiva, another native of Kuka, in the most ambitious of all translation projects in terms of quantity and fidelity. Yet all such luminaries continued to revere Fotu Deng's memory, which would suggest that he was more than a mere showman and miracle worker. The Jie practiced cremation, which was notably a custom in the city-state of Chach in the western regions. Scholars have shown that the Jie believed in Sogdian Zoroastrianism, stating that there was a temple or altar in Ye called Hutian, which was the Chinese name for the Zoroastrian god, Ahura Mazda. Due to the veneration of fire in Zoroastrianism, another example they cite is the giant lamp that was built in Shi Hu's palace for his crowning ceremony as heavenly king. Xie Fei and Wei Mengbian were 2 mechanical engineers under the later Zhao who built a south-pointing chariot, also called south-pointing carriage, a directional compass vehicle that apparently did not use magnetic principle, but was operated by use of differential gears, which apply an equal amount of torque to driving wheels rotating at different speeds, or a similar angular differential principle. For the great ingenuity shown in the construction of the device, Shi Hu granted Xie Fei the noble title of Hao without land possessions and rewarded him generously. Shi Min, an adopted Han Chinese son of Jie's posterior Zhao, had at one time killed about 200,000 Jie. History recorded that the criteria used for sorting out the Jie was their tall nose bridge. History said that Shi Min's armies killed those people who looked like Jie because of their high nose bridge. After surviving multiple assassination attempts, Shi Min suspected that he could not trust the Jie and tribespeople in Ye. In 349, he ordered the killing of every Jie and Hu people, identifying them by their high noses and full beards. Shi Min personally led his soldiers to massacre the tribes in Ye, while his generals purged their armies of tribesmen. According to some sources, more than 200,000 of them were slain. In 351, the final ruler of later Zhao, Shi Ji, and his family were massacred in Xiongnu, bringing the dynasty to an end. The last member of the Shi clan fled to the eastern Jin in Jiankang, but was executed upon his arrival. The remaining Jie people eventually became subjects of the Xianbei-led former Yan, Mongolians, who defeated Ranmin and conquered the Hebei and Shandong regions. The Jie then adopted the Mongolic language of the Xianbei, contributing to descriptions of yellow-headed Xianbei. This is why there are descriptions of blonde Xianbei. These people with diverse hair colors were actually Jie Sogdians, Dingling Scythians, and Yenisei Kyrgyz, Turkized Scythians, who adopted the Mongolic language of the Xianbei. Many of them had become slaves of the Xianbei. Jie warriors were incorporated into Xianbei armies, and some of them had high military positions. Zhu Rong, c. 493, November 1, 530, courtesy named Tianbao, formerly Prince Wu of Jin, was a general of the Xianbei-led Chinese Northern Wei dynasty. Erzhu ancestors were hereditary chiefs of the Qihu tribe of Jie extraction, and they used Erzhu as their family name after settling on Erzhu River, modern Jujia River, Shanxi. Erzhu great-great-grandfather, Erzhu Yujian, had assisted Northern Wei's founding emperor, Emperor Daowu, in his campaigns, and therefore was granted the Shurong region, in modern Shuozhou, Shanxi, as the Erzhu's hereditary domain. There, the Erzhus practiced husbandry and became extremely wealthy from the accumulation of livestock. Erzhu himself was born in 493 during the reign of Emperor Xiaowen. When Erzhu father Erzhu Xinqing grew old, Erzhu Xinqing asked that the chief post be passed to Erzhu, and the imperial government agreed. Erzhu was described to be a pale-skinned man who was handsome, resolute, ambitious, and capable in military matters, and was particularly strict in military discipline. As he saw the empire begin to degrade during Emperor Xiaoming's reign, he began to consider whether the empire would collapse, and he sold part of his livestock to gather brave warriors around him. Erzhu Jie warriors, a military force primarily composed of ethnic Jie people under his command, were later absorbed into the Xianbei army led by Gao Huan, who eventually founded the Northern Qi dynasty, effectively becoming a key component of his military power base following Erzhu death and the subsequent power vacuum in northern China. The Jie people were known for their fierce fighting abilities and were often used as military units by various Chinese dynasties. Erzhu, a powerful military leader during the Northern Wei dynasty, had a large contingent of Jie warriors under his control. Gao Huan's rise. Following Erzhu assassination, Gao Huan, a prominent Xianbei military leader, emerged as a major power in the north. He strategically absorbed many of Erzhu former troops, including the Sogdian Jie warriors, into his own army, leveraging their combat prowess to consolidate his power. By incorporating the Jie warriors into his Xianbei army, Gao Huan significantly strengthened his military capabilities, which played a crucial role in his eventual establishment of the Northern Qi dynasty. While the Chinese author Yang Xuanji had to be very careful to avoid derogatory references to the Xianbei, who still held power when he wrote his books, there was one ethnic group on which he could focus his hatred. They were the Erzhu, Sogdians. He talked about the family background of the Erzhu. Yang tells us, Erzhu was from North Shurong. His family were hereditary ruling chiefs of the first rank and dukes of Bolingjun. He had over 8,000 tribesmen, several tens of thousands of horses, and wealth to match a heavenly treasury. This is a short paragraph, but clear enough to let his readers understand what kind of people they were. Shurong, Shoxian, Shanxi, a place on the north frontier, was in fact not the Erzhu place of origin, but a fief given to them as a reward when one of their ancestors made military contributions to Tuoba Gui, emperor of the Northern Wei dynasty. Their earlier family place was in the area of Erzhu River, from where they received their surname. This also is evidence of non-Chinese customs in medieval Chinese society. The Erzhu were an ethnic group of Jie, a non-Chinese, non-Xianbei race from Central Asia. They were different from Han Chinese and Xianbei in their ethnic origin, their appearance, and in their behavior. Yang did not say directly that they were barbarians in this paragraph, but he implied it. He tells us that they originally came from Shurong in the north, and that their social status was that of hereditary chief, with their wealth counted by how many tribesmen and horses they controlled. In all these respects, they were unlike the Sinified Xianbei aristocrats. In other parts of his book, he referred to them by their non-Chinese names, which look barbarous when written in Chinese. He called their armies Hu cavalry, and he called them Hu barbarians. This word was used in a most derogatory way in the story of the Princess of Shouyang. The Princess of Shouyang, the elder sister of the Emperor Zhuang, was very beautiful. She was married to Xiaozong, Prince of Danyang, a refugee aristocrat from the south who had been given high positions in the Northern Wei. When the capital fell, Xiaozong abandoned his province and fled north. Erzhu Shilong, who was dictator at the time, had the princess brought back to Luoyang. When he tried to force her, she reviled him with the words, "How dare you insult the daughter of a heavenly king, you barbarian dog? I would die by the sword rather than be sullied by a mutinous barbarian." In his fury, Erzhu Shilong strangled her. The princess called Erzhu a barbarian dog and called herself the daughter of the heavenly king, making a clear difference between herself and the Erzhu Jie people. Yang Xuanji directly insulted the Jie with such strong language because the Jie were a different people, not Xianbei, like Gao Huan and Yuan Tai. From the catastrophic damage which the Erzhu Jie did to Luoyang, it is clear that unlike the Xianbei, who lived in Luoyang and had adopted the culture of earlier Chinese dynasties, the Jie had no love of Chinese culture. Among the people of Luoyang, the Tuoba family of Xianbei had transformed their cultural identity to Han Chinese and lived a Han Chinese life in a Han Chinese city. They were completely different from people like the Erzhu Sogdians, whom they saw as barbarians in culture and in ethnicity. This shows that the white Jie Sogdians had continued their distinct identity even while being surrounded by Mongoloid groups who they didn't relate to. Gai Wu, a rebel during the Northern Wei dynasty, is described in the Book of Qi as a Jihu, although the Book of Wei states that he was a Lushuihu, Yueqi Tocharian, instead. According to the unearthed epitaph of Shi Chongui, the Shi clan of Shatuo origin that ruled the later Jin, 936 to 947, claimed that they were descendants of the Ji Emperor Shi Lei. The Shatuo were a mixed Turkic group with some partial Sogdian ancestry. The Tang dynasty rebel, An Lushan of Sogdian and Gokturk descent, was called a Jihu, Ji barbarian. Although he was not descended from the Ji, this shows the continued association between the Ji and Sogdians. The Jie people who stayed in China and Xianbei territories had eventually disappeared from mixing with these Mongoloid populations. But others eventually migrated to the north, where they mixed with white Scythian-descended groups instead. Yellow-haired slaves of the Xianbei barbarians. In Chinese literature, there are many intriguing descriptions of white Xianbei and yellow-headed Xianbei. These groups appear to be white slaves who were mostly descended from the Scythian tribes of southern Siberia. They had adopted the Mongolic language of the Xianbei, while groups in other areas, like the Yenisei Kyrgyz and Dingling, had adopted Turkic languages. Some of the Jie minority had mixed with these Scythian slave groups instead of the Chinese or Xianbei. These Scythian Jie slaves and low castes were often conflated with the Xianbei themselves by Chinese authors. Some would later gain higher positions in Xianbei society. When an Eastern Jin minister, Wang Dun, rebelled against Emperor Mingdi in AD 322 to 325, he called the emperor by a derogatory name of Huang Shunu of the Xianbei, meaning the yellow-haired slave of the Xianbei barbarians. This is because Mingdi's mother was from the Dai prefecture, i.e. the Yanmenguan Pass area in today's Shanxi, where the Xianbei had a dominant presence. The document Jiji Tongjian, it means Comprehensive Mirror for Aid in Government, was presented to the emperor during the Song dynasty by Sima Guang, 1019 to 1086. He had spent 18 years composing it. Here is told a story that the emperor of the dynasty Eastern Jin, Jin Mingdi, Sima Xiao 323 to 326 AC, had yellow hair and beard because his mother was a part of the Xianbei Confederation's Scythian concubine. Once he went out to inspect his troops. However, because of the color of his hair, his soldiers believed he was a Xianbei and chased him as an enemy. The mother of Emperor Ming of Jin, Lady Shun, was a lowly concubine of Xianbei, Scythian slave stock. During a confrontation between Emperor Ming and a rebel force in 324, his enemies were confused by his appearance and thought he was a Xianbei due to his yellow beard. Emperor Ming's yellowish hair could have been inherited from his mother, who was a Mongolized Scythian concubine. Lady Shun was a concubine of Emperor Yuan of Jin, Sima Rui, while he was the Prince of Langi. Initially, he favored her greatly. The couple had two sons, Sima Xiao, Emperor Ming, and Sima Po. Because of the favor that she received, Sima Rui's wife, Princess Yu Mengmu, was very jealous of her and mistreated her. Lady Shun, not happy about her low station and Princess Yu's mistreatment, often complained and was rebuked by Prince Rui. Eventually, he threw her out of the household. After Sima Xiao succeeded to the throne as Emperor Ming in January 323, he gave her a mansion and called her the Lady of Jianan. Later that year, he welcomed her back to the palace. After he died in October 325 and his son Emperor Cheng ascended the throne, She was treated as virtual Empress Dowager without the title, and she probably effectively raised Emperor Cheng, since Emperor Cheng's mother Yu Wenjun died in 328 in the midst of the Su-Jun disturbance, while Emperor Cheng was only 7. She died in 335 and was posthumously called the Lady of Yuzhang, and a temple was built for her. Some sources mention that she was from the Xianbei confederacies and that Sima Xiao inherited her exotic Scythian looks. Folk songs from back then sounded Huangtou Xianbei, which means Xianbei have yellow head. The Tang dynasty poet Zhang Ji had described some of the Xianbei people as yellow-headed Xianbei in A Journey to Yongjia. The Book of Jin states that in the state of Chao Wei, Xianbei immigrants were known as the White Tribe. This is probably because the white Scythian tribes had stood out more from a Han perspective, even though the majority of the Xianbei were not white. But the Xianbei themselves may have also been more light-skinned than the Han Chinese on average. The Xianbei as a whole became stereotyped as white. During the Tang dynasty, the poet Zhang Ji described the Xianbei entering Luoyang as yellow-headed. During the Song dynasty, the poet and painter Su Shi was inspired by a painting of a Xianbei riding a horse and wrote a poem describing an elderly Xianbei with reddish hair and blue eyes. Su Shi had wrote about red-haired and blue-eyed Lao Xianbei. Su Dongpo had described the red-bearded and bluish-eyed old Xianbei from his poem Shuhangan Ma. Historian Edward H. Schaeffer believes many of the Xianbei were blondes, but others, such as Charles Holcomb, think it is likely that the bulk of the Xianbei were not visibly very different in appearance from the general population of northeastern Asia. Chinese historians describe some Huangtou Xianbei warriors as white or blonde with blue eyes or red-haired in various Chinese sources, such as the Book of the Jin, the Jinshu. Deng Ai 197–264 AD, the general of the Cao Wei kingdom, decided to relocate tens of thousands of Xianbei warriors to the Gansu area and also to mix them with the locals so that they would become less bloodthirsty. He called them the White Troops, Baibu. Jinshu 47:22. During the mid-2nd century AD, the Murong Xianbei were called white, and the women were often praised by the Han Chinese leaders for their fairness. Another description is in the poem of Zhang Ji, 712–779 AD, who writes, "The yellow-headed Xianbei entered Luoyang." Viewing the paintings of Han Gang, 706–783 AD, Su Dongpo, 1037–1101 AD, the famous Northern Song dynasty poet, described a Xianbei figure riding a horse, the elder Xianbei with reddish beard and blue eyes. Following records of Huangtou yellowhead Xianbei, there were Huangtou yellowhead Shiwei during the Mongols' time frame and Huangtou yellowhead Jurchen during the Jin time period. In the Tang dynasty, poet Du Fu had a sentence to the effect of calling Huangtou Shi-er, i.e. a yellow-headed man of the Shi tribe. And in Emperor Fujian of anterior Qin dynasty AD 351–394 referred to the Xianbei rebels as Bai Lu, namely white enemies. Historians, including Tai Dongfan, said that the Xianbei had possessed lighter skin. Mingqing dynastic printing houses, which compiled China's 25 chronicles into commonly readable series, had pointed out that the Jin dynasty wealthy in northern China liked to buy Xianbei women as concubines for the tall height of those women, likely Scythian women. Having interpreted Huang Shunu of the Xianbei as the yellow-haired slave of the Xianbei, it appears that the Europoid Scythians were originally slaves, low castes, and mercenaries of the Xianbei after submitting to them. But some of them had eventually gained higher positions as well. In the eyes of the Qiang Di people, northerners like the Xianbei themselves might possess a lighter skin tone. Today's Tibetans and Qiangs in Sichuan do possess darker complexions. Using modern science, we could attribute the shade difference among southern and northern Mongolian stock people to different levels of ultraviolet exposure. In any case, you could not bundle the two epithets of Huang Shu and Bai Lu, white enemy, but to interpret the two epithets separately. Otherwise, a wrong conclusion could be reached. Some of the white Scythian and Jie people among the Xianbei had migrated to more isolated areas, while others mixed with the Xianbei and Han. Later Xianbei people displayed limited amounts of admixture with so-called late Xiongnu Sarmatian-like groups, Europoids. So far, Western steppe herder ancestry was only found at low amounts or absent entirely among the different Xianbei remains, average at Sioux 7%. However, it was likely much higher among certain individuals. Several paintings of the Tuoba Xianbei Northern Zhou General Li Shan depict him as having mixed Eurasian traits and a tall, slender nose bridge. But the majority of these whites would join other Scytho-Siberian groups to form a people known as the Shiwei, the ancestors of the Mongols. Mongolized Scythians. The Shiwei were descended from Dingling Scythian tribes and some Sogdian Jie remnants. The Shiwei were Scythians and a minority of Jie descendants who had adopted Mongolic and Tungusic languages. They inhabited far eastern Mongolia, northern Inner Mongolia, northern Manchuria, and the area near the Okhotsk Sea beach. Records mentioning the Shiwei were recorded from the time of the Northern Wei, 386 to 534, until the rise of the Mongols under Genghis Khan in 1206, when the name Mongol and Tatar were applied to all the Shiwei tribes. The Huangtou, yellowhead, Shiwei may have been named so because of a high incidence of blondness within their tribe. Shiwei is a variant transcription for Xianbei. This is a name they acquired while under Xianbei rule, along with the Mongolic language which they adopted from them. Among the Shiwei tribes would be an interesting name called Huangtou Shiwei, i.e., the yellowhead Shiwei. Xinwu Dai Shi, New History of Five Dynasties, citing the account of a Chinese Huqiao taken prisoner of war by the Khitans, mentioned that there was a statelet called Ujuelu with Maodo hairy head people to the northwest of Shiwei and to the north of the Kyrgyz people. Also to the northeast of Shiwei would be another group of Mao Shao or hairy head people. Similar to the account of the Huangtou Shiwei in the Chinese history chronicles, there were entries of Chinese history records about Huangtou Xianbei as part of a federation of possibly 20 to 30 Xianbei-fied Scythian tribes and clans before the Mongols, as well as Huangtou Jurchen, not actual Jurchens, but Tungustified Shiwei Scythians who had lived in present-day Manchuria. This pointed to the nomadic confederation of Mongolized and Tungustified Scythians that extended from Manchuria all the way to the northwestern direction toward today's Tuva. During the period from the Northern Qi 550 to 577 to the Sui dynasty 581-618, there were 5 groups of Shiwei. They were the Nan, Southern Shiwei, Bei, Northern Shiwei, Da, Great Shiwei, Bo Shiwei, and Shenmoda Shiwei. In the Tang period 618 to 907, it is known that there were 20 Shiwei tribes, according to the records in dynastic histories. They were the Wusugu, Yisaimo, Sayeshi, Heiji, Wuluohu, Nali, Lingshi, Shanbei, Huangtou, Yellowhead, Da, Great Rujiao, Lesser Ruje, Pawo, Nabiji, Luotuo, Dong, Eastern Shiwei, Shi, Western Shiwei, Great Shiwei, Menggu Shiwei Mongols, Luozu Shiwei, and Dagui. Among the 20 Shiwei tribes, there would be an interesting one referred to as the Huangtou Shiwei, i.e., Yellowhead Shiwei. Xinwu Dai Shi, citing the account of a Chinese Huqiao taken into a prisoner of war by the Khitans, mentioned that there was a statelet called Ujuelu with the Maodo, hairy head, people to the northwest of Shiwei and to the north of the Kyrgyz people, Turkizid Scythians. Also to the northeast of Shiwei would be another group of Mao Shao, or the hairy head people. The Da Shiwei tribe is thought to be descended from some Ruran people who fled east after being defeated by the Turks in 555. Tatar referred to Da Shiwei who were Ruran migrants, racially Mongoloid. But later the meaning of these words would change over time. The Mongoloid Tatars, Rurans, Da Shiwei, were racially distinct from the other Shiwei tribes who were white Scythian descendants. The Hichezi, Black Cart, was a Shiwei clan famous for their cart industry. According to the Liaoshi, at one time the Khitan learnt the art of cart making from the Hichezi clan. This shows connections to Scythian groups like the Dingling, who were also famous for their cart industry. The Huangtou, Yellowhead, Shiwei may have been named so because of a high incidence of blondness within their tribe, again showing Europoid Scythian connections. The Jurchen at the most distant frontiers were near the Eastern Sea and were therefore called Eastern Sea Jurchen. Many of them had yellow hair and side whiskers. All of those that had yellow hair and green eyes were called Yellowhead Jurchen. Shu Mengxin, 1126 to 1207. This passage describes an unusual group of Jurchen who were identified by the Liao state. It provides strong evidence for the amount of regional, political, and ethnic diversity among those labeled as Jurchen. The yellow-headed Jurchen was a misnomer for the yellow-headed Huangtou Shiwei. They were the same people. Chinese historians link the Tungusic speakers among the Shiwei people to the Dingling, considering them as descendants of the Dingling owing to linguistic similarities. Some Shiwei Scythians adopted Tungusic as a lingua franca in order to better communicate with surrounding tribes, while other tribes adopted Mongolic while under Xianbei rule. This explains the references to yellow-headed Jurchen. Li Duozuo was an ethnically Tungusic Mohe general of the Chinese Tang dynasty and Wu Zetian's Zhou dynasty. His ancestors were said to be Mohe chieftains with the title Yellow-Headed Commandant, Huangtou Dudu. The tribes, which the Chinese called Moha, may have been very racially diverse and included both Tungusic Mongoloids and Shiwei Scythians. This may suggest that Li Duozuo was of white Shiwei descent. Either that or the Mohe people had imitated the titles of the Shiwei. This is a title they had acquired from the Shiwei, suggesting linguistic influence from the Shiwei to the Mohe. The yellow-headed title and other linguistic features were likely borrowed by the Mongoloid Tungustic Mohe and Jurchens from the white Shiwei tribes. The Mohe's yellow-headed commandant title came from cultural influences from these yellow-headed Jurchens, Shiwei. This Scythian Huangtou tribe may have spoken Tungusic and was in contact with the Mongoloid Mohe, Jurchens of present-day Manchuria, influencing their titles and customs, e.g. yellow-headed commandant. They spread the Huangtou title to the Tungusic Mongoloids like the Mohe and Jurchen. Since Manchus have basically no West Eurasian admixture, then this suggests that this white Huangtou Shiwei Scythian tribe, yellowhead Jurchens, were either killed at some point or they migrated to other regions. In the 7th century, there was a record in regard to the difference between the Ashina Turks, Gokturks from the ordinary Hu, Scythians, and Sogdians. A Turkic Khan called Simo was not recommended for the post as Turkic Arch-Khan because he looked more like an ordinary Hu nomad than an Ashina Turk. Simo, for his appearance similar to the Hu barbarians of Central Asia, was suspected to be not of the Ashina stock, and hence was conferred the post as Jibitella Tele. There was a tribe among the Gokturks called Yellowhead Turks, possibly due to some Shiwei, Yenisei Kyrgyz, and other Scythian-descended slaves joining some of the Gokturk tribes and passing on the Yellowhead title. That would explain the presence of these Gokturks who had partial Hu Sogdian features from mixing with slaves. The yellow-headed title had also spread to the Uyghurs, who had been under Gokturk rule. Eventually, this yellow-headed title had took on a symbolic meaning, but it originated among the Scythian slaves of the Xianbei and the Scythian Shiwei. These white Scythian groups had adopted the Mongolic language after submitting to the Xianbei. The Jie people were used in Xianbei armies such as Erzhu Rong's Jie warriors. These Jie warriors and the Xianbei's Scythian slaves had contributed to the yellow-headed Xianbei descriptions from Chinese authors. Some of these Jie Sogdians and Scytho-Siberians would migrate further east, where some of them started adopting the Tungusic languages of the Mohe Jurchens. These Mongolized and Tungusified Europoids of Tagar Scythian and Jie Sogdian extraction had introduced nomadic technologies and wagons to Tungusic people, and they influenced some of their terminology and titles, yellow-headed commandants. The people who were misnamed the yellow-headed Jurchens were actually a Shiwei tribe, possibly the tribe which was called yellow-headed Shiwei. The original Mongols, referred to as the Menggu Shiwei, were one of the Mongolic-speaking Shiwei tribal unions. The Menggu Shiwei, one of the 20 Shiwei tribes during the Tang dynasty, 618 to 907, were also called the Menggu during the Liao dynasty, 907 to 1125, and are generally considered to be the ancestors of the Kamog Mongols of Genghis Khan. The modern Korean pronunciation of Mengwu is Mongol, Mongol. Mongolia is still called Menggu in Chinese today. Bodanchar Munkhog and Kaidu were pre-Genghis Khan chieftains of the Shiwei. The Shiwei were Siberian Scythians, Yenisei Kyrgyz, Dingling Tile, with some Jie remnants. The name of the parent house of the Mongols' Barlas and Borjigin clans, House of Genghis Khan and Timur, was Kiat, almost identical to the Middle Chinese pronunciation of the name Jie, Kiat. This is because the Jie, Kiat, and Scythians had interacted while under Xianbei rule, forming the Kiat clan of the Menggu Shiwei. The rise of Genghis Khan, green-eyed founder of the Mongol Empire. According to the mythology of the Kamag Mongols, a person by the name of Dobu Mergen had married Alan Ko, Alan Gua the Fair. After having 2 children, Dobu Mergen passed away. However, Alan Ko was said to have had an immaculate conception, bearing 3 more children, including Bodanchar, who possessed gray eyes against the chestnut eye color of his brothers. The 3 brothers from the Immaculate Conception were to form the Katagin, Seljuts, and the Borjigin clans, respectively, with the former 2 later being part of Jamuka's coalition against Temujin. The Borjigid clan was a branch of the Kiats. The Borjigids had a legend that after the death of Dobun Mergen, the alleged ancestress Alan Ko bore Bodanchar after being visited by a strange golden glittering man with red hair and blue-green eyes. Kai Dongfan, the last distinguished imperial examinee from the Manchu era, stated that Bodanchar had gray eyes. The importance of the Borjigid clan lies in the legend that after the death of Dobun Mergen, the alleged ancestress Alan Ko bore Bodanchar after being visited by a strange golden glittering man. Rashid ad-Din described him as having red hair and blue-green eyes. Yuan Shi, History of Yuan Dynasty, recorded that Bodanchar had gray eyes. His brothers and half-brothers had chestnut-colored eyes. Temujin, who would later be called Genghis Khan, universal ruler, was born into the Borjigin clan of the Mongol Menggu Shiwei tribe to Yesugei, a chieftain who claimed descent from the legendary warlord Bodanchar Munkhag and his principal wife Helun, originally of the Olkhanud clan. Genghis Khan belonged to the Borjigid clan, which was a branch of the Kiat. No accurate portraits of Genghis exist today, and any surviving depictions are considered to be artistic interpretations. The Persian chronicler Juzjani and the Song diplomat Zhao Hong provide the 2 earliest descriptions of Genghis Khan. Both recorded that he was tall and strong with a powerful stature. Zhao wrote that Genghis had a broad brow, thick brow ridge, and long beard, while Juzjani commented on his cat's eyes. Cats typically have green or blue eyes. The 14th century Persian chronicler Rashid al-Din described Genghis Khan as having red hair and greenish-blue eyes. Rashid al-Din Hamadani once explained that Borjigin designated in the Turkic languages a man with dark blue eyes, a shal, and did so again without mentioning the said language, adding that Yesugei's children, and the majority of their own children, had had such eyes per coincidence, also recalling that the genie which had impregnated Alan Gua after her husband's death had had dark blue eyes, Ashalchashm. Abu al-Ghazi Bahadur later paraphrased Hamadani by relating that Yesugei's eyes were dark blue, Sala, that the Mongols called such eyes Borchikin, that his sons and most of their descendants had dark blue eyes, Ashal, and that one recognized thus in Yesugei's lineage the characteristic sign of the genie which had visited Alan Gua and had Borchikin eyes. In the Georgian Chronicles, in a passage written in the 14th century, Genghis Khan is similarly described as a large, good-looking man with red hair. Genghis Khan was described as having red hair and green eyes. Rashid ad-Din, in the Collected Chronicles, said that Genghis Khan was amazed to see that Kublai had black hair, while the rest of their family had red hair, and commented that his grandson must have taken his maternal uncle's features. Paul Rachnevsky quoted the near-contemporary Chinese Zhao Hong as saying that Genghis Khan was tall and had a long beard, and quoted Marco Polo as saying that Kublai did have black eyes, but fair complexion ringed with red. Rashid al-Din, in Collected Chronicles, said that Genghis Khan was amazed to see that Kublai had black hair while the rest of their family had reddish hair. Although many regard the portrait at the National Palace Museum in Taipei, Taiwan, as the depiction which most closely resembles Genghis Khan, all existing portraits, including this one, are essentially arbitrary interpretations of Genghis Khan's appearance by historians living generations after Genghis Khan's era. The Persian historian Rashid al-Din reported in his Jami's al-Tawarik, written at the start of the 14th century, that most Borjigin ancestors of Genghis Khan were tall, long-bearded, red-haired, and bluish-green-eyed, suggesting that Genghis Khan's lineage had Caucasoid-specific genetic features. He also said that Genghis Khan looked just like his ancestors, but Kublai Khan, his grandson, did not inherit his ancestors' red hair, implying that the addition of Mongoloid-specific alleles for determining hair color to the genetic makeup of Genghis Khan's Borjigin clan was from the mother of Kublai Khan, that is, the daughter-in-law of Genghis Khan, Sorghaghtani Beki. In the 12th century, the Kamag Mongol Khanate, Tatar Confederation, Karaite Khanate, Merkit Confederation, and Naiman Khanate were 5 major Mongolic-speaking tribal confederations and khanates in the Mongolian plateau. Only the first of these were of white Scythian descent. The other 4 were racially Mongoloid. The incorporation of those groups after Genghis Khan's conquests had diluted the original white traits of the Kamag Mongols and other Shiwei tribes. Berti, c. 1161–1230, was the first wife of Temujin, who became Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire. Berti became the head of the first court of Genghis Khan and Grand Empress of his empire. She was betrothed to Genghis at a young age, married at 17, and then kidnapped by a rival tribe. Her husband's rescue of her is considered one of the key events that started him on his path to becoming a conqueror. She gave birth to 4 sons and 5 daughters, who, along with their own descendants, were the primary bloodline in the expansion of the Mongol Empire. Berti was born c. 1161 into the Olkhonut of Khongirad. This tribe was friendly to the Borjigin tribe into which Temujin was born. She was the daughter of De Session and Chotan. She was described as having a fair complexion, with light in her face and fire in her eyes, a term signifying intelligence. The girls that came from the Olkhonut tribe were known for being particularly beautiful. Soon after her marriage to Temujin was made official, the Burgi escarpment was attacked by the 3 Merkit, who were a confederation of 3 tribes inhabiting the basin of the Selenga and Orkhon rivers. Temujin and his family were able to escape on horses, but there were no horses left for Berti. A servant at the camp tried to hide Berti in an old cart, which he harnessed to an ox to try to escape upstream with her. The cart eventually broke, and when the servant tried to keep moving Berti on foot, they were surrounded by soldiers who discovered her within the cart. The 3 Merkit believed their raid victorious, as they had planned it in retaliation for the abduction of Holun, Temujin's mother, who was also from the Khongirad people, from their people many years before. She was forcibly married to Chilger Boko, the younger brother of Healun's original husband. Temujin was distressed by the abduction of his wife and remarked that his bed was made empty and his breast was torn apart. Ong Khan, who had been gifted Berti's dowry, promised to help Temujin recover Berti from the 3 Merkit, and together they came up with a plan to return her. Temujin had convinced his allies to assemble substantial forces to help him rescue Berti. 8 months later, the pair led a charge into the Barkhan territory, and upon their arrival the Merkit people fled in numbers down the Selenga River. Berti and Temujin were finally reunited, as described in the secret history of the Mongols. As the pillaging and plundering went on, Temujin moved among the people that were hurriedly escaping, calling, "Berti, Berti!" And so he came upon her, for Lady Berti was among those fleeing people. She heard the voice of Temujin, and, recognizing it, she got off the cart and came running towards him. Although it was still night, Lady Berti and Koakchin both recognized Temujin's reins and tether and grabbed them. It was moonlight. He looked at them, recognized Lady Berti, and they fell into each other's arms. Under Jamukha's command, the combined army campaigned against the Merkits and defeated them, recovering Berti and taking large amounts of plunder. After the defeat of the Mergid, the reputation of Temujin rose rapidly, and the leading members of the Kamag Mongol aristocracy enthroned him with the title Genghis Khan as the ruler of Kamag Mongol. It is speculated to be an ancient form of the word Tenghis, ocean, sea. Khongirad relationship with the Mongols, the legend of Ergunakun. According to Mongol legend, 2 warriors named Kian, Hiad, and Negus, Mongolian Nokos, dog or wolf, were defeated in battle and forced to seek shelter in an enclosed valley called Ergune Khan, steep cliffs. After several generations, the descendants of these heroes became too numerous for the valley to support, but no one remembered the way out. A blacksmith came up with a solution. They would create their own way out by melting an exposed iron vein that existed in one of the encircling mountains. Building a massive fire and stoking it with 70 large bellows, the trapped clan did just that and succeeded in creating a passage to the outside world. Once free, the people of Qian and Negus went on to create several tribes, including the Mongols and the Khongirads, whose susceptibility to gout was explained by the fact that their ancestors were the first to flee Ergen Kun, so they burned their feet on the hot iron. Although this story is mythological, it shows that the Khongirads were considered to be closely related to the Kamag Mongols. Consort tribe. In addition to having a shared ancestry with the Mongols in general, the Khongirads also shared ancestors with the Mongol royal line, whose originator, Alan Koa, was a woman of the Karlas clan, an offshoot of the Khongirads founded by the legendary Mizar Ulug. Down to the 12th century, Mongol rulers such as Kabul Khan and his grandfather Genghis Khan were still taking Khongirad wives. Berte was born c. 1161 into the Olkhonid of Khongirad. This tribe was friendly to the Borjigin tribe, into which Temujin was born. She was the daughter of Day Session and Chotan. She was described as having a fair complexion, with light in her face and fire in her eyes, a term signifying intelligence. The girls that came from the Olkhonid tribe were known for being particularly beautiful. Borte's Olkhonid of Khongirad clan were closely associated with the Borjigin clan, and they provided many wives to Borjigin leaders. The Khongirads were closely related to the Shiwei, and they spoke Mongolic. They were the consort clan to the Borjigin, and Borte was described in the secret history of the Mongols as having a fair complexion. The Tatars, da Shiwei, were likely Mongoloids from the Ruran Khaganate who fled after the Gokturk rebellion. Da Shiwei Tatars would have spoke a Mongolic language since they were Rurans. Something the Shiwei Khongirad had in common with the Rurans Tatars is that they were both descended from Xianbei slaves and underclasses. The Ruran people were originally slaves of the Xianbei, with the founder of the Ruran Khaganate, Mugulu, being a recorded Xianbei slave. This allowed the Ruran to eventually rise to power after the Xianbei migrated south, establishing their own nomadic empire on the steppes. The founding figure of the Ruran, Mugulu, is described in Chinese sources as a Xianbei slave. The Xianbei reportedly used the Ruran people as a subjugated group, even using the term Ruran, which translates to wriggling worms, to denote their perceived inferior status. After the Xianbei moved southward, the Ruran gained strength and established their own powerful nomadic empire, the Ruran Khaganate. The term Tatar first appeared in the late classical era and was the name of the 12th ruler of the Ruran Khanate. The Chinese historical book, Book of Song. According to historical records, after the Ruran Khanate was destroyed by a pincer attack from the Turks and northern Wei, their remaining forces fled northeast in search of the protection of the Shiwei people. They established a tribe called the Tatar tribe under the name of their great ancestor Tatar, or collectively referred to as the Tatar Shiwei or Da Shiwei, using the names of their allies. In the following years, such as the Gokturkic era and the Uyghur Khaganate era, their descendants were known as the Nine Family Tatars, while their Shiwei alliance allies, such as the Menggu Shiwei, were also commonly referred to as the 30 Family Tatars due to their strength and great reputation. So the Gokturks had misused the term Tatar to refer to all of the Shiwei. Later, the Mongoloid Rurande Shui Tatars became the enemies of Genghis Khan's Borjigin clan and the Menggu Shiwei Mongols Europoids. The name Tatar was possibly first transliterated in the Book of Song as Datan and Tantan, which the book's compilers stated to be other names of the Rurans. Book of Wei traced the Rurans' origins back to the Donghu, who were of Proto-Mongolic origin. The Rurans, Tatars' putative ancestors, roamed modern-day Mongolia in summer and crossed the Gobi Desert southwards in winter in search of pastures. Rurans founded their Khaganate in the 5th century, around 402 CE. Among the Rurans' subjects were the Ashina tribe, who overthrew their Rouran overlords in 552 and annihilated the Rourans in 555. One branch of the dispersed Rourans migrated to the greater Khingan mountain range, where they renamed themselves after Tantan, a historical Kagan, and gradually incorporated themselves into the Shiwei tribal complex and emerged as Da, Great Shiwei. Tantan was Yujulu Datan, a ruler of the Rouran from 414 to July 429 with the title of Muhan Heshingai Kagan. The secret history of the Mongols claimed that the Tatars were mortal enemies of the Mongols. They betrayed Kamag Mongols Khan Ambagai to be executed by the Jurchen Jin dynasty and also treacherously poisoned Chief Yesuke, father of Genghis Khan. Consequently, in 1202, Genghis Khan allied with Ong Khan, conquered the Tatars, and had Tatar men taller than a linchpin executed and spared only women and children. The surviving Tatars were absorbed into Genghis Khan's tribe, and the Tatar Confederation ceased to exist. Since the Tatars were a tribe of thousands, their absorption greatly enlarged Genghis Khan's tribe. Since the original Tatars were Mongoloid Rourans, their incorporation would cause a dilution of white features among the original Mongols, Shiwei. The Rourans, Tatars, Avars, Da Shiwei were a Donghu Mongoloid people. When Genghis Khan conquered and incorporated their people, then they had contributed to the dilution of white traits among the Shiwei and Khongirad tribes. The mixed-race Ongud Shaduo people were also part of the Tatar Confederation by that point. The Kamag Mongols, Kiad, Taichud, and Jalairs, were all descendants of Mongolized Scythians from former Xianbei rule. Originally, they were the only ones who were called Mongols. Tatars, Merkits, Naimans, Karites, etc. weren't a part of Kamag Mongol. They weren't even considered Mongols until Genghis Khan defeated them. The white Kamag Mongols had conquered all of those Asian tribes and united them under a state called Ik-Mongol Uls. By 1206, all the tribes and confederations of the Mongolian steppe had come under the leadership of Temujin. A congress of the Mongol aristocrats on the river Onon in 1206 enthroned Temujin as Genghis Khan, as emperor of all Mongols. Genghis Khan and his immediate successors conquered nearly all of Asia and European Russia and sent armies as far as Central Europe and Southeast Asia. The Mongol Empire and the states that emerged from it played a major role in the history of the 13th and 14th centuries. The 16-year conquests of Genghis Khan resulted in the formation of the Mongol Empire. He died on the 16th of August, 1227, and was buried at the site Ihiotug on the southern slopes of the Khenti mountain range. His tomb has never been found to this day. Genghis Khan left a vast and controversial legacy. His foundation of the largest contiguous state in world history permanently altered the worldview of European, Islamic, and East Asian civilizations, according to Atwood. His conquests enabled the creation of Eurasian trading systems unprecedented in their scale, which brought wealth and security to the tribes. Although he very likely did not codify the written body of laws known as the Great Yasa, he did reorganize the legal system and establish a powerful judicial authority under Shigi Kutuk. The Mongol Empire had an establishing effect on the social, cultural, and economic life of the inhabitants of the vast Eurasian territory in the 13th and 14th centuries. It enabled exchange of knowledge, inventions, and culture between the West and East. This epoch is called Pax Mongolica. On the other hand, his conquests were ruthless and brutal. The prosperous civilizations of China, Central Asia, and Persia were devastated by the Mongol assaults and underwent multi-generational trauma and suffering as a result. The Mongol invasion of Central Asia is the main reason why the Turkicized Scythians and Sogdians who used to live there are now extinct. Although Genghis Khan was white, he led a vast army of Turco-Mongoloids who had brutally killed and raped the Turkicized Scythian tribes of Central Asia, such as the Cumans and Kipchaks, on a massive scale. The surviving women intermarried with the Mongoloid invaders. Present-day Central Asians, such as the Kazakhs, are now predominantly Mongoloid as a result of this. West Eurasian ancestry among Kazakhs has now been reduced to 35 to 37.5%, whereas the original Cumans, Kipchaks, were consistently described with white features, and many were blonde. The spread of haplogroup R1b across the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan was likely R1b, not C2. The Mongoloids who Genghis Khan had conquered Karaites, Merkits, Tatars, Naimans had spread haplogroup C2. Genghis and the other elites, original Mongols, had spread haplogroup R1b. The theory that Genghis Khan has C2 has been criticized. A white paper by the American Society of Human Genetics Ancestry and Ancestry Testing Task Force, Royal et al. 2010, observed the Zerjal et al. C2 hypothesis. Although such a connection is by no means impossible, we currently have no way of assessing how much confidence to place in such a connection. We emphasize, however, that whenever formal inferences about population history have been attempted with uniparental systems, the statistical power is generally low. Claims of connections, therefore, between specific uniparental lineages and historical figures or historical migrations of peoples are merely speculative. In a 2017 review paper published in Human Genetics, authors Chiara Bettini and Mark Jobling cast doubts on Zerjal's 2003 theory that Genghis Khan is linked to haplogroup C. Ancient DNA data, Lakagvasuren et al. 2016, from remains in high-status Mongolian graves dated to 1130-1250 CE, revealed MSY lineages belonging to HGR1b rather than HGC. There are a number of explanations for such findings, but taken at face value, they do not support the Genghis Khan hypothesis for the origin of the widespread Asian expansion lineage, Zerjal et al. 2003. Research published in 2016 suggested that Genghis possibly belonged to the haplogroup R1b, R1b-M343. 5 bodies dating from about 1130 to 1250 were found in graves in Tavan Tolgoi, Mongolia. The authors suggested they were members of the Golden family and linked the spread of R1b-M343 to the former territories of the Mongol Empire. Y haplogroup R1b-M343 of the Tavan Tolgoi bodies, mixed Golden Horde descendants, point to this being the Y haplogroup of Genghis Khan and Genghis Khan's Borjigin clan. Eastern Russian Tatars, not to be confused with the original Tatars, although they likely have some ancestry from them, Bashkirs and Pakistani Hazara were found to carry R1b-M343 at unusually high frequencies of 12.65%, 46.07%, and 32%, respectively, compared to other regions of Eastern Asia, which rarely have this haplotype. Interestingly, ancestors of those 3 populations were all closely associated with the medieval Mongol Empire. That is, Russian Tatars and Bashkirs are descendants of the Golden Horde, also known as the Ulus of Jochi, that had been controlled by Jochi, the first son of Genghis Khan, and his descendants during the 12th–15th centuries. In addition, some of the Hazara tribes are believed to consist of descendants of Mongolian soldiers and their slave women after the 1221 siege of Bamiyan under the leadership of Genghis Khan. Through domination of Hazara, Mongolians strongly influenced the genetic makeup of the Hazara people, especially in Pakistan. Some modern Hazara populations resemble Mongolians in their physical attributes, including facial bone structure. This is due to Mongoloid low castes, e.g. Naimans and Turks mixing with the Hazara. Some Hazara also display partially white features such as light hair and eye colors. This comes from the Mongol Empire's white elite. Similarly, the high frequency of R1b-M343 in geographic regions associated with the past Mongol Khanates, including the Golden Horde, from Ural Mountain to western Siberia, which includes Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, Ilkhanate, Iran, and neighboring territories including Armenia, Turkey, Georgia, Afghanistan, Syria, and Tajikistan, and Chagatai Khanate from the Aral Sea to the Altai Mountain, including Pakistan, Hazara, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, India, and China, strongly suggest a close association between the Y haplotype R1b-M343 and the past Mongol Empire. Descendants of Genghis Khan. Later, the Mongol Empire would fragment into smaller territories, which were each ruled by different descendants of Genghis Khan. These included the Yuan dynasty based in China and the 3 Western Khanates, i.e. the Golden Horde, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Ilkhanate. Mongoloid admixture had happened very quickly in the Yuan dynasty of China. Genghis Khan's grandsons, Kublai Khan and Mongke Khan, were described and depicted with partially Asian traits since their mother was Sorghaghtani Beki, a princess from the swarthy Karaite tribe. Hulegu Khan, founder of the Ilkhanate in Persia, was also a son of Sorghaghtani Beki. Both Yuan and Ilkhanate paintings had portrayed their Mongol leaders with mixed race features. Even ethnically Persian people in the Ilkhanate had started portraying themselves with Mongoloid traits despite not having any Mongoloid ancestry. Persian historian Rashid al-Din described the first meeting of Genghis and Kublai Khan when Genghis was shocked to find that Kublai had not inherited his red hair. The Yuan dynasty artists had never seen Genghis Khan in person, but they did see Kublai Khan, who was portrayed with Asian traits. This is because Kublai Khan was a mixed half-Asian grandson of Genghis Khan. His mother, Sorgaghtani Beki, was a Karaite princess and daughter-in-law of Genghis Khan, married to Tolui, Genghis' youngest son. The Karaites were one of the 5 dominant Turco-Mongol tribal confederations, Khanites, in the Altai-Sayan region during the 12th century. Their name is a cognate with the Mongolian Kar and Turkic Kara for black swarthy. There have been various other Mongol and Turkic tribes with names involving the term, which are often conflated. According to the early 14th century work Jami al-Tawarik by Rashid al-Din Hamadani, Mongol legend traced the clan back to 8 brothers with unusually dark faces and the confederation they founded. Their original territory was expansive, corresponding to much of what is now Mongolia. Vasily Bartold, 1913, located them along the upper Onon and Kurlan rivers and along the Toul River. They were defeated by Genghis Khan in 1203 and became influential in the rise of the Mongol Empire and were gradually absorbed into the succeeding Mongol Khanates during the 13th century. According to Marco Polo's accounts, Kublai Khan was described as having a middle stature, neither tall nor short, with well-proportioned limbs, a fair complexion often flushed with a rosy tint, black and handsome eyes, and a well-shaped, prominent nose. This description suggests some Europoid traits despite being mixed race, but it's consistent with his mixed racial ancestry and matches his imperial Yuan portrait. When Genghis Khan's eye fell upon him, Kubilai, he said, "All our children are red-haired, but this child is black-haired like his maternal uncle Sorgaghtani Beki's brothers, who were never recorded, apparently." Jami al-Tawarik, Compendium of Chronicles by Rashid al-Din. William of Rubruck's description of Manki Khan. He, Manki Khan, was seated on a couch and was dressed in a skin spotted and glossy, like a seal's skin. He is a little man of medium height, aged 45 years, and a young wife sat beside him, and a very ugly full-grown girl called Serena, with other children, sat on a couch after them. A little man of medium height suggests Mongoloid influence from his Karaite ancestry. Rubruck's description of Manki's daughter as very ugly reflects his European standards of beauty and suggests that there had been further Mongoloid dilution. In contrast, Jochi's son Batu Khan of the Golden Horde didn't have any Mongoloid admixture from Sorgaghtani Beki. Jochi is likely a true descendant of Genghis Khan. The idea that Jochi was born from a Merkit rapist was a false rumor. That would explain why Golden Horde descendants like the Tavan Tolgoi bodies have R1b. William of Rubruck described Batu Khan, Jochi's son, as about the height of his lord John de Beaumont and as having his entire face covered with reddish spots, freckles. Also, when Jami al-Tawarik says that Genghis was surprised by Kublai's appearance, he says, "All our children are red-haired," which implies that Jochi also had a reddish hair color. Most people who have reddish freckles all over their face like Batu Khan are red-haired. Batu Khan's mother was from Khongirad, which was one of the Khongirad tribes. Batu Khan's father was Jochi, and Jochi's father and mother were Genghis Khan and Borte, so Batu was very Shiwei Khongirad descended. Early Shiwei Khongirad were isolated Scythian tribes who adopted the Xianbei's language. Batu Khan was a direct descendant of this bloodline with no foreign admixture. The predominantly white ancestry of the Shiwei and Khongirads had persisted for a while among some of the Mongol Empire and Golden Horde elites, but gradually disappeared into the majority of the population who were predominantly Mongoloid, Tatars, Karaites, Merkits, Naimans, etc. Ali Sultan, a Khan of the Chagatai Khanate, was portrayed in The Martyrdom of the Franciscans, painted in 1342 by Ambrogio Lorenzetti as a white European. The elite Mongol soldier in the painting is also a white man with brown hair and blue eyes. The painting takes place in Al-Malik, capital of the Chagatai Khanate, in 1339. The central ruler who ordered the killing was the Chagatai usurper Ali Sultan, a descendant of Genghis Khan, R. 1339-1342. A Mongoloid Asian man with a pointed cap can be seen in the left of the painting, which clearly shows that the artist knew what Asians looked like, and yet he portrayed Ali Sultan and the Mongol soldier as white people. There's also an Arab Middle Eastern-looking man in the painting. The mummy of Timur, discovered by Soviet archaeologists, had reddish-gray hair and a reddish-brown mustache. Timur, also known as Tamerlane, was described as tall and strongly built, with a big head and broad forehead, and his skeleton, found in his Gur-e-Amir mausoleum in Samarkand, indicated he was of above-average height. Timur's physical description and the findings from his tomb. Physical description in life: Timur was described as lofty of stature, with a long beard, big brow and head, stout, powerful in voice, fearless of death, and lame on the right side. Tomb opening. Timur's tomb in the Gur-e-Amir mausoleum in Samarkand was opened in 1941 by Soviet scientists. Skeleton findings. The Soviet Archaeological Commission found the skeleton of a man who, though lame in both right limbs, must have been of powerful physique and above average height. Height. Standing at 170 centimeters, Timur was quite tall for his time. Other descriptions. He was also described as pale and ruddy and wore a full beard. When he was alive, he was described as being tall and pale-skinned. The Arab historian Ibn Tagri Baradi had described Timur's physical features, stating that he was tall with a great front, great appearance, and great strength. He was white color tinged with reddish, with broad shoulders, thick fingers, thick elbows, fitness, long beard, and lameness in the right leg. Timur's skull has Caucasoid traits: long, narrow, prominent nasal aperture, pointed chin, thick brow ridge. The famous facial reconstruction from Mikhail Gerasimov, which is usually shown, was given some mixed ambiguous traits which were not strictly based off of his skull shape. For example, they assumed he had thick lips. However, lip shape cannot be deduced from skulls. This reconstruction is probably not very accurate. However, there have been some more recent reconstructions which appear to be more accurate. This statue of Timur is a more accurate depiction than Mikhail Gerasimov's reconstruction. The reason why some of the Chagatai Khanate elite and Timur had retained white features longer than other Mongol elites is because they mixed with a Turkicized Scythian tribe called the Karluks. The Karluks were absorbed into the Chagatai Khanate of the Mongol Empire. After the absorption of the Karakhanid Khanate by the Chagatai Khanate, the ethnonym Karluk became rarely used. The Karluk language was the primary basis for the later lingua franca of the Chagatai Khanate and Central Asia under the Timurid dynasty. It is therefore designated by linguists and historians as the Chagatai language, but its contemporaries, such as Timur and Babur, simply called it Turki. Arab historian al-Masudi stated that among Turkic peoples, the Karluks were the most beautiful in form, the tallest in stature, and the most lordly in appearance, implying that they were one of the many Turkicized Scythian and Sogdian tribes. A genetic study published in Nature in May 2018 examined the remains of two Karluk males buried at Butakti in the Tian Shan between 800 AD and 1000 AD. One male carried the paternal haplogroup J2A, West Eurasian, and the maternal haplogroup A, associated with Ancient North Eurasians, AN, while the other carried the maternal haplogroup F1B1E, associated with Ancient North Eurasians, ANE. Timur's descendants gradually mixed with non-whites, Persians, Mongoloids, etc., and later Indians during the Mughal Empire. Traces of white admixture in modern Mongolians. Mongoloid dilution started after Genghis Khan had conquered and incorporated millions of Mongoloids, Tatars, Karaites, Merkits, Naimans, Khitans, etc., into the Great Mongol State. Although the original Mongols, Khongirads, and other Shiwei tribes were a white Xian-Beifid Scythian people, they had incorporated tons of Mongoloid Asian tribes into their Great Mongol State during Genghis's conquests. The white Europoid elite had gradually mixed with the Mongoloid Asian tribes who were now the majority. Amir Khusrau, a 13th century poet of Persian language, had for a brief time been captured by the Mongols. He described the Mongols as squat bodies suited to attack, bow legs and ugly faces marked by prominent ears and flat noses, swarthy skins, and bristling hair. Unsurprisingly, the modern Mongolian population is predominantly East Asian Mongoloid. According to genetic studies, the West Eurasian ancestry in the Mongolian population is estimated to be between the 5 to 10% range. This would come from the original Kamog Mongol elite of Scythian Jie Shiwei descent and the various other Indo-Europeans who have lived in Mongolia. Although Mongolians are predominantly Mongoloid, there are still some rare individuals among them who can display lighter features due to their Europoid admixture, a genetic throwback to Mongolia's white past. Communist purges of partial Borjigin descendants. The Borjigin held power over Mongolia for many centuries, even during the Qing period, and only lost power when communists took control in the 20th century. Aristocratic descent was something to be forgotten in the socialist period. Joseph Stalin's associates executed some 30,000 Mongols, including Borjigin nobles, in a series of campaigns against their culture and religion. Clan association has lost its practical relevance in the 20th century, but is still considered a matter of honor and pride by many Mongolians. In the 1920s, the communist regime banned the use of clan names. When the ban was lifted again in 1997, and people were told they had to have surnames, most families had lost knowledge about their clan association. Because of that, a disproportionate number of families registered the most prestigious clan name, Borjigin, many of them without historic justification. The label Borjigin is used as a measure of cultural supremacy. In Inner Mongolia, the Borjigid or Kiat Ji name became the basis for many Chinese surnames adopted by ethnic Inner Mongols. The Inner Mongolian Borjigin Taijis took the surname Bao from Borjigid, and in Ordoschi, Chiat. Genetic research has proposed that populations as far apart as the Eastern Russian Tatars, Bashkirs, and Pakistani Hazara may have Borjigid Kiat ancestry. The Chiat clan name is still found among the Kazakhs, Uzbeks, and Nogai Karakalpaks. When clan names returned in 1997, many adopted Borjigin falsely, suggesting real descendants were decimated or hid their lineage. Of course, the full-blooded Borjigins and other Shiwei had long disappeared by this time. By the 1930s, full-blooded Borjigins and Shiwei, Scythian Jie elites, had disappeared, melted into Mongoloid tribes over centuries. The Stalinist purges targeted their partial descendants, nobles with diluted R1b and Genghisid pride, wiping out even the shadow of Mongolia's white past.